gauge is a manometer gauge. Many people think that it's measuring radon. It does not measure radon. All this gauge does is let you know that the fan is running. This is a hollow U-tube with gauge oil in it. This is a hollow flex tube. The flex tube's connected to the pipe. And since the fan is outside, up to the fan there's a negative pressure in the system. So this is like sucking on a straw. As long as the fan is working and the apparatus is set up correctly, it lifts this column of fluid up because this is on the negative pressure side of the fan. Conversely, this side goes down. As long as there's a disparity between the two levels, and every house has a different level. This one's at about 2 inches of water column. But every house has a disparity that's different, and as long as one side is higher than the other, the fan is operating. Again, this does not tell you the radon levels. This only tells you that your fan is operating with just a visual glance. You can look at it and see, oh yeah, my fan must be running. That column's higher than that column. Required also by the EPA is the identification label, the EPA number of the remediator, the date it was installed, and I like to include the type of fan that I've used for the system. That way, if somebody calls me in 9 years, I used to have to drive out to the house, find out what kind of fan they had, order a bad fan replacement, and then come back a second trip later and install the fan when the fan goes bad. Well, fan is written right there, and if they called me, I'd be able to say, yeah, I can get you one of those for $300, and I could come out and install it next week. And then I'd order the fan. So that's just an identification label that supports the manometer gauge. It says, this system monitors the fan on the radon mitigation system. If the gauge levels are uneven, the fan is operating. If the levels are even, the fan is not operating. Please check the GFCI, the circuit breakers, and the fan switch. There's a fan switch outside. We haven't gotten to that yet. But also it says, please retest for radon every 2 years. When you move into a house, and you may get a false sense of security after finding out that the house was low after the retest from the initial system installation, then you test it 2 or 3 years later, and then a decade goes by and you don't test it, you could have a period where your fan is quit and you don't realize it. So your radon levels would be back to wherever they were before the system was installed. So that's why this label identifies this manometer gauge.
So once, if you're a homeowner and you test for radon, you do have radon, and then you have the remediation system installed, how long do you have to wait before retesting to make sure that the system is working?
Well, it depends on every house. Is different. The problem I have, this house has a door, a double door. So while my crew is in here working on this house, they can air out the house. The problem with testing too soon is that the radon that was here the day we arrived to put in the system is still in the house for a couple of days, sometimes a couple of weeks. There's something called a radioactive decay chain. The half-life of radon is 3.8 days. So if theoretically there were no windows or doors in a basement, and I find a couple of those every year, many houses just have one small builder window. That doesn't really vent out the house either. My guys have to go up the main stairs and go outside the front, walk around the whole time they're installing the system. But the point is, those houses, you have to wait a little bit longer. And the decay chain. If you have 50 picocuries and no ventilation in a basement, it takes 4 days, or 3.8 days, for that radon to decay down to 25 picocuries. 4 more days for it to decay down to 12. 4 more days for it to go down to 6. And I've had houses over 400 before. And I told them to wait a month, even if they had a door in the basement. But if you have windows and doors in the basement, and everything's opened up on a nice spring day, and you have 9 picocuries, you could test that house 2 days later. But if you had one with very high levels and not much ventilation in the basement, it's definitely better to wait at least 2 weeks before you ran a subsequent retest.
Okay, great. Would you like to go outside and take a look at the exterior
Absolutely.
part of the
Thanks, Mary.
system?